I've been a wildlife cameraman for over 30 years now, and during that time I've been very fortunate to work across all 7 continents. I've filmed at the North Pole, the South Pole, and most habitats in between. I live in the city of Bristol in England, and my life has been one of contrasts, travelling from man-made city to the wildest, most natural, remote places. I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts and experiences, because I think there's something we're losing sight of, losing touch with. Something I think that affects our physical and mental well-being. We have highly developed senses, and they've evolved over thousands of years, but I think we're drowning them out. Back in 1999, I was offered the chance to make a film about western lowland gorillas in Central Africa. Now, I'd never seen or filmed gorillas in the wild before, so of course I accepted the job. It sounded quite exciting. One of the locations was to be in Nuabali and Ndoki National Park in the Republic of Congo. And to me, the word Congo conjured up an image of a kind of a dark, threatening place, really. And I remember when I was younger, my grandma telling me about the early explorers that went to that part of the world and the horrors that they suffered, not to mention what Joseph Conrad wrote about in his book, The Heart of Darkness. My first film trip there was going to be 6 weeks long, and it took 6 days to get to location. So by plane, truck, boat up the Ndoki River, and then finally on foot the last few miles, being guided by the Baaka pygmies. The further we went into the forest, the thicker it got. And I have to admit, I was actually quite frightened going there. This is kind of what you see working your way through. It's thick, thick forest. Sometimes you could literally only see 8 feet through the forest. And we walked in single file behind the Baaka pygmies along the forest elephant paths, because that's the easiest way to get through the forest. And I think the reason I was frightened is because I know what animals live there. And we were seeing signs along the forest paths. We were seeing fresh piles of elephant dung, gorilla, leopard, buffalo. So you have these constant reminders of what's behind all that thicket. And as we worked our way through the forest, every now and again the Baaka would stop and they would point at something. And I would look, and all I could see was this chaos, leaves, twigs, branches. But clearly they could see something going through there. And we worked on our way, and then we'd stop again and they'd point something else out. And I would stare, and not wanting to look stupid, I'd say, yeah, great, yeah, thanks. So I couldn't see, God knows how they were seeing through that chaos. Anyway, a really interesting thing happened over a few days working in this environment is that somehow my brain started to decipher this chaos. And instead of seeing the leaves, the twigs, the branches, the trees, suddenly I was seeing through the gaps. My brain had worked out that you look through the holes to be able to see what they were pointing at. And at one point we stopped, and in very hushed tones they say, "Voilà, elephant." And they pointed through, and I looked through, and I could see about 20 yards through this thicket, and there was the eye of an elephant. And about 2 foot to the right of it, I could see the back of the curve of its ear, and about 6 or 8 feet behind that, they're quite big animals, I could see the tail of this elephant. And somehow, despite seeing just 3 tiny jigsaw bits through this thick forest, I could kind of imagine and make out the rest of this elephant. And really weirdly, even though there was this giant thing that could potentially flatten me, because I could work out where it was, its head and its tail, and I could kind of see it, it became less frightening. So as the days went on, we got lucky with tracking the gorillas. Even getting just glimpses of these gorillas, my brain could now work out where the rest of it was. Say this shot here, you can just see the feet, but you can imagine where the head and shoulders are, which way it's facing. And this is kind of what I do for television. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build up a picture of what it's like to be in the forest. So I'll take a wide shot, a mid shot, then a couple of details. And hopefully what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to mimic what my brain and eyes are seeing in the forest and put it on the screen, so you as viewers at home can have the same experience of being in that forest. There were times when the gorillas went into more open bits of forest. This is probably the most we saw ever in one frame, and hopefully you can see very clearly there's a gorilla in the middle of that frame. And once you've got that search image in your head, hopefully you can see there's 3 more gorillas in that picture. But it's not easy, so I'll forgive you if you don't see them. This is more typical of the images we get, or glimpses we get of the gorilla. This is a female feeding on the forest floor. And even though I could only see her eyes and a bit of her head and so on, as she moved through the foliage, it was like kind of scanning that animal, and slowly I could build up the whole image of that animal. But this is very typical of the habitat they live in and the sort of image you will see of them in that forest. Spending time in the forest, my hearing too came alive, as well as my brain and my sight managing to work this chaos out. My hearing came alive, and it's such a 3D environment. You can hear wind through the tops of the trees, you can hear birds flying over, you can hear fruit falling. And what's amazing is I could hear, every now and again, you'd hear a twig break. And because of my 3D spatial awareness of hearing, that's why we've got 2 ears, I could tell where that twig was, and somehow I could tell whether it had fallen from a tree or whether it had been trodden on by an animal and had broken. But my brain was slowly working all this out. My sense of smell, too, was becoming enhanced. There are so many smells in the forest, the wet soil, the dung, rotting fruit, elephants, gorillas, you name it. And what was amazing, if you smelt something, I also knew where it was. So back in the day, you were taught as a Boy Scout, you'd lick your finger and hold it up to the wind, and you'd feel the cold side of your finger, and you knew the breeze was coming from here. But somehow my brain was bringing all my senses alive, and I could just sense the faintest of breeze on my face. So if I smelt something, I knew where it was. It was almost like I'd been given some kind of performance-enhancing drug, although I don't condone that. Over the weeks, spending time filming the gorillas, I noticed that they also spend a lot of time just sitting, looking and listening. Perhaps this silverback is looking up and he's maybe scanning for fruit, ripe fruit. Maybe he's listening for rival groups of gorillas, to protect his territory. He might be listening out for predators, like a leopard. But they spend a lot of time sitting. And it made me aware of how three-dimensional this world is. The forest is vertical as well as all around you. And I think this is what we do when we go on vacation. You sit, you soak it all in, you relax. And maybe that's the only time our senses really have a chance to do what they evolved to do. After each film trip, when I returned home, there was always an element of culture shock, going back to the hustle and bustle of the city. And I think this constant contrast of going from the wild places to a man-made environment is what made me realize how disruptive humans are as a species, and how we're smothering our senses and instincts. For instance, in the city, how often am I aware of smell? You might smell coffee from a coffee shop, or the exhaust from a burger bar, or exhaust from a truck, perfume or aftershave if you're in a lift or on a bus. But it's not really often you really notice a smell. So I find my instincts and senses are being smothered in a man-made environment. Thousands of years of evolution to produce binocular vision, binocular hearing, sense of smell, that can detect thousands of different factions of smell. And yet we're blocking all that with our own design. In the countryside in England, you can hear sounds like this. But in the city, we're trading it for sounds like this. Now, this is what I call noise pollution. To me, there's nothing pleasant about listening to this. Yes, you might be able to pick out where the sounds are coming from, the siren or the pneumatic drill, but it is just pollution. And I don't know about you, but I know which one I prefer. And is it any coincidence that if you buy a relaxation tape, the soundtracks are always natural sounds? So as the sun sets and it starts to get dark, we're also then aware that it's not just sound we're polluting this planet with. Man-made light is drowning out the night. When did you last look up at the stars and the moon in the city? When did you gaze at the Milky Way overhead? I think nowadays in our cities it's impossible. So we are fast losing and missing out on natural spectacles like this. These are fireflies in your forests in Tennessee, in America, and this is one of the most amazing spectacles I've seen. Each one of these insects is able to produce light in its backside, and it's able to flash and communicate with its fellow species. And unfortunately, this is a dying thing. It's getting more and more difficult to see this because of our light pollution. With man-made lighting, we're disrupting the creatures that communicate with light. Light pollution is also disrupting rhythms of nature, our own day-night cycle, for one. Traveling the world and crossing time zones, I'm all too aware that my body clock is controlled by daylight. So we are literally losing sight of the natural world. Getting around, it's very easy to just switch off our natural sense of direction. Now with GPS and sat-nav, it's on your phone, it's in your car, we can just follow computer instructions. But many creatures on this planet have amazing senses of direction. Homing pigeons, for one. You can stick a homing pigeon in a basket, you can drive 100 miles, it hasn't got windows to look out of, it hasn't been learning the route. You can let it out of that basket, it's going to beat you home. It'll do a few circles, fly it home. And butterflies, turtles, whales, there are animals which are doing amazing migrations. A turtle can actually return, years after it's hatched and made its way into the ocean. A turtle can return to exactly that same beach to lay its own eggs later in life. But I think relying on technology, we're going to lose our natural ability to navigate. So back in the Congo forest, after we'd been meandering for hours on the forest trails, quite often I'd stop and I'd say to our Bayaka trackers, "Okay, où est le camp? Where's the camp?" And 3 guys would go, and they'd all point exactly where it was. And I'd get my GPS out and I'd look and I think, my God, they're right. And on other days, we'd be trekking through the forest and we'd stop and they'd say to us as the film crew, they'd say, "Où est le camp?" And we'd all pointing completely different directions. And they found this absolutely hilarious. They couldn't understand why we didn't know where the camp was. So, as I say, we are losing the ability to find our way around. So this is one of the first photographs I ever took. I think it's about the 4th photograph I took. This is an orca leaping out of an aquarium in Dudley Zoo in England. Now, we all know that you shouldn't keep orca in captivity. If you keep an orca in captivity, it will suffer. It's an intelligent animal, and it's not getting the right stimuli in an environment like this. So we know they should be allowed to roam free in the oceans. But I sometimes feel a bit like this when I'm in the city, that somehow I'm hemmed in, and I kind of miss the beauty and complexity of nature. So how many of you enjoy relaxing, say, in the park? Or to escape the city, you'll go hiking in the countryside? How many people choose to go to the beach for a holiday? It seems that humans seek out the natural world. But despite being an intelligent species, we've kind of overrun the world. And we've inadvertently overrun the world, and we're changing it for our own needs. We're taking too much from our planet, and yet in many ways we're making it a worse place to live, less habitable, not just for us, but for all other species as well. So as a species, humans are soaring through the very branch that we're sitting on. And the crazy thing is, we're doing it knowingly. So humans evolved as part of nature alongside millions and millions of other species. Insects, mammals, birds, reptiles, plants. The list is almost endless. And to those early human explorers, our planet must have seemed like it had endless resources. We helped ourselves to as much as we wanted, often taking more than we needed. But we have taken too much. We have virtually destroyed it. And to think, for me, it was the forests of Congo that make me feel most alive. In the city, I am barely aware of my senses and instincts that mostly lie dormant or are drowned out. But going to the Congo all those years ago, my senses were awakened by the need to use them. Back home in Bristol, I'm very aware that something is missing from my life. I really miss the wild places. I miss the wild places in the city, and I miss nature, and I miss greenery. I do have a sanctuary, though. This is a shed at the bottom of my garden, and it's the one place on this planet I can always find tranquility. And I know why that is. It's because it's surrounded by greenery, and even though I'm in the city, I can kind of cocoon myself and escape from it. It's a place where I always feel comfortable. But I do have hope for the planet. I think most of us know that humans need to change our ways, and we need to do it fast. We need to rewild the world, and in particular, our cities. Nature has proved to be quite resilient. This is Angkor Wat in Cambodia, a 12th century city that stretched over 4,000 acres. Tikal in Guatemala. It was a city complex twice the size of Manhattan, and yet it was abandoned in 900 AD, and then nature did such a good job of recovery that it was then undiscovered for another 1,000 years. So today, architects are designing buildings to include more greenery in nature. We know the physical and mental health benefits, and selfishly, for me, I actually quite like buildings like this. Wouldn't it be nice to have more greenery in our lives and more nature in our lives? And I'm not suggesting we have lions and tigers roaming our streets, but wouldn't it be nice to look out of your office window and see a butterfly on a flower, or see a bee collecting pollen, or see a bird building a nest or feeding its chicks? And it's not a new concept. In 1853, somebody had the foresight to set aside a bit of land that they weren't going to build on. It's called Central Park, and it helps define New York as a city. And to vouch for its popularity, nearly 40 million people a year visit this park. So I'm not alone in thinking we should rewild our planet. We need to try and restore nature and address the imbalance set up by man. Let's start to repair this world for our own mental and physical health. Let's re-energize our senses that took so long to evolve. Personally, I would feel much happier in a city that had buildings like this. And I really hope you agree. Thank you.